Unspoken Issues.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Unspoken Issues podcast. We are getting ready to jump into the Image universe. That's right. And this is actually going to be an event discussion where a lot of the Image heroes are coming together to face one threat. Now, there's a handful of events that happen in the Image hero universe. This is called Mars Attacks Image. And we were calling it Mars Attacks the Image universe, which actually, that sounds that makes more sense than Mars Attacks Image, but I understand what's happening here. It's the Image universe that Mars Attacks is showing up. Now, I'm not here alone, of course. Dean Compton is with me. Dean Compton, are you ready to talk about Mars Attacks Image?
Yeah, I mean, I'm as ready as I can be. I mean, we're trying to get this done. It's a little spooky. The Mars Attacks property goes back to the 60s. The great Wally Wood dealing out that EC style clean gore. I don't know. That sounds like dichotomous, but Wally Wood with that clean look, giving that gore, making, apparently like created an uproar in the 60s. Fucking Mars Attacks is a great property. We obviously here, 90s comics. You can't talk 90s comics without talking Image, and you can't talk about Image without talking about those early days of the Image universe. So it seemed to fire on all cylinders for what we do here. Let me ask something, because I should know this, honestly. Is this a Topps Comics crossover? Because Mars Attacks, like, they had the line, they had the license, because Topps Cards owns Mars Attacks, but I don't know if they were still publishing comics at this time.
Mars Attacks Image number 1 of 4, December of 96. First printing
and out of business by then.
All right, I was going to say, it does say Mars Attacks is a registered trademark of Topps Company. Right, there's not a mention of Topps on the front cover.
Right. I couldn't remember, because Topps did Mars Attacks comics during the time when they did the Kirbyverse, the Dracula stuff, Jason versus Leatherface, X-Files, Xena, a few other things. And honestly, a company really worth looking at. The Magnolia Dracula stuff's really good to look at. Jason versus Leatherface, a lot of fun. X-Files, it's weird to think about now, but like the X-Files comic was hot. And not just like hot, like money-wise, but it was critically acclaimed, probably because there was too much oversight from the X-Files people. Apparently, it made it very late, but I'm getting off on a different subject. But, Topps has always owned Mars Attacks. It's neat to see they were just in the comics game. They were apparently out by this point. I wasn't sure quite when that line of demarcation was, but it's neat to see these aliens, bust into the Image universe. And this is also around the same time that Tim Burton is dropping the Mars Attacks movie. So I'm sure that didn't hurt, hey, let's get something out there that gets that property onto some comic book shelves, even if we're not publishing comic books anymore. And you can also tell that like Eric Larson and Gary Carlson and Keith Giffen like the Mars Attacks property and really wanted to play with it. So I think this has its ups and downs, but we're going to have fun talking about it.
Right. The Mars Attacks movie came out December 13th of 1996. Like I said, the inside cover had it listed at December. I assume it was probably a month, maybe before that, or 2, maybe at the most, that it got the comic book released. So that's usually what you see. Regardless, yeah, you're right. It's tying in with, it's kind of jumping on that popularity of the film that's upcoming. It might have been right at the same time. Heck, you never know. But hey, you and I aren't alone, Dean. We got Darry. Did you know? Okay, so this is a 1996 comic book. Did you know much about Mars Attacks prior to the film or this comic? Did you know anything about it at all?
No, I didn't know anything about Mars Attacks, but I bought this off the shelf because I was very excited for an Image crossover. The first issue's cover literally has Spawn, Savage Dragon, Fairchild, and Shadowhawk all together with someone with a cape in the background. This was exactly the type of comic I wanted, because I love the Image lineup. I was getting, at the very least, Dragon and Spawn regularly. And when I saw this, I was like, I want this. I don't really know what Mars Attacks is. Everyone else is saying it's kind of an older thing. That's fine. The movie was out at this time. I didn't really like the movie. I'm not the world's biggest Tim Burton fan, but this comic was great. I bought it off the shelf. I have read it since then, and it doesn't hold up 100%, but for the most part, it was a really enjoyable reread.
That movie, I honestly think much like, it's funny when you think about it, because like when people talk about Tim Burton and like Batman, they're like, he made it serious, and he made the tone less campy. I'm like, have you seen Batman Returns? Like, it is full of nothing but like penguin commandos, and like it doesn't make any sense. Like all of this silly, like, look, like I get it, it's dark, but it's still just as campy. I feel the same about like Mars Attacks. Like people are like, oh, he's gonna make this like, this is gonna be something that people are gonna be able to sink their teeth into. It is a silly movie. Yeah. It's a silly movie, and I think the Martians look good. Other than that, I can take or leave it. But the Martians look great, and that's really sort of like the Ghost Rider movie. That's most of what it is. Like, people shit on the Ghost Rider movies too, but I'm like, motherfucker, he drove that fucking flaming motorcycle up a building, and his skull was on fire, and that's why I'm here, and it looked fine, so I'm fine with most everything else. I think Mars Attacks is kind of similar to that. The Martians look great, so anything else is, it's pretty cool.
Star-studded cast, though. Okay, Jack Nicholson, Annette Bening, Danny DeVito, Jack Black, Lisa Marie, Glenn Close, Pierce Brosnan, Michael J. Fox, Sarah Jessica Parker, Natalie Portman, Martin Short. And I'm stopping there because I don't want to continue to bore you, but that is a massive cast.
Mid-90s stars do bore me. Thank you for recognizing.
Right.
I was about to fall asleep on Sarah Jessica.
But I think that was one of the big things that I remember actually from this film was like how many freaking notable stars there were in it.
I remember
and act. I don't know why, but I still continue to see memes with that. And that didn't show up at all in the book, which is, I assume that's a movie thing. I don't know about if that's been around prior to. But, Mars Attacks has been around since the 60s. You mentioned Wally Wood. Yeah, Mars Attacks, I'm just hopping onto the wiki here. A trading card set released in 1962 by Topps. That's how long it's been around. And yeah, some of these cards, I love them. Yeah.
Particularly for the time, like there's like ants like chopping people in half and shit. And like, you got to keep in mind, non-sports trading cards weren't a big thing at this time. So like they just put this out there. In fact, sports trading cards that weren't baseball cards weren't really a thing at this time. In fact, cards that weren't Topps cards weren't really a thing at this time. There are a few, Bowman existed prior, but it's mostly Topps. And so like they just put this fucking out there right next to like the 1962 Topps baseball card set, and they probably both cost a goddamn nickel. And like if you're a parent, you're probably like, oh, well, I got you some cards. This is different. And then your kid has a fucking heart attack because ants eat people, as it turns out. If they're big. I mean, the normal ants, it takes them a while. You need a lot of them to eat a person. But the giant ones, they just one.
Oh yeah, they'll snap you in half. I remember like
unless you have an oatmeal cream pie, like in Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Then you have something to bargain with.
I remember like in the late 80s, early 90s, they started kind of having a resurgence of not Mars Attacks, but more along the lines of like really gruesome kind of cards. Garbage Pail Kids.
Pail Kids is probably the precursor to that. And then before that, there's a weird thing where I can't remember what it's called. Like it's about products, and instead of like Frosted Flakes, it would be
wacky packages.
Yeah, wacky packages. That's it. So like I think those are the things that start to, and also a proliferation of non-sports cards. In like 1990, you could get non-sports cards from everything from like Comic Images, like a Jim Lee set that was specialty only in a comic book store, to Desert Storm trading cards, like in a grocery store.
At the auction, and there were 2 unopened boxes of Desert Storm cards there. Pro set, and there was another one.
I saw some the other day when we went to the comic book store for my birthday, some unopened wax packs, and I'm like, I'm not paying for firsthand, let alone secondhand propaganda.
Oh,
but when I was a kid, I wanted them bad. Like I was like,
oh yeah,
God.
oh yeah.
It's weird to think. It's so weird to think about. Like you're like, oh, like regardless of how you feel about the war, like should we have trading cards for wars? Like actively, you can make an argument like 30 years later, 40 years later, it's like a historical thing. But like, this seems weird. We should have been more on top of it.
Operation, I think it was one of the sets was called Operation Yellow Ribbon or something like that. And it's definitely, it was a strange time. Yeah. But let's get back. We'll get back to the comic here.
Let's talk about Mars Attacks, Jesse.
Yeah, Mars Attacks, the Image universe, Mars Attacks Image. And like I said, I'm gonna put the synopsis in here. We're gonna break this up 2 issues apiece. I mean, it is as it says. The Martians are upset. They're worried we're going to show up on Mars and like conquer Mars or something. So they decide a preemptive strike and send a bunch of Martians to attack the Earth, and they do a darn good job of it. I mean, we are hurting, we'll put it that way, and our only, real line of defense, aside from what's left of the military, is the Image superheroes and some of the supervillains coming together to just try and stave off this Martian attack from the human race, or against the human race. Dean, I mean, I've got my notes here. I want you to go ahead and go first on these first two issues. Just kind of tell me what you thought of the story itself as we get into the first two issues, any standout moments, and we'll kind of go from there.
The standout moment, I think, of issue number 1, honestly, is where you see Youngblood get killed. Like, this is how they, canonically get Youngblood out of Image. And, you see, Youngblood's headquarters. Maybe you shouldn't have put all those goddamn Ys on your stuff, because, bullseyes for these Martians. And also, you see the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for just, half a second.
Right. We're in a panel.
The panel next to it. So that I enjoy that. But it was really neat that this is around the time where Rob Liefeld got fired from Image or quit, depending on who you ask. They were having a meeting to fire him. They were going to fire him. He sent a fax in that said he quit. So as far as he's concerned, he quit. They think they fired him. That's something for them to sort out. I mean, let's be honest, though. They weren't giving him a chance to resign. In a lot of cases, they'll be like, hey, we're going to fire you or you can quit. That was not something that was put on the table, if memory serves. It possibly wasn't. I forgot. But if memory serves, it wasn't. So I do like that this was a neat way to get the Youngblood crew out of the out of the Image universe, not the Marvel universe.
So Image has 7 founding partners, but they're all, there are 6 founding studios, and they all technically don't have to refer to one another, though for the first couple of years they do. The only creator who ever refers to this story again numerous times is Eric Larson, who's cited as the editor for some reason on these 4 issues. It's clearly his story. The Savage Dragon's a big deal. There was a sister series to this that we didn't read for this called Mars Attacks: The Savage Dragon. This is clearly Larson's baby. And I've read almost all of Savage Dragon, and yeah, continuity is very important for him. He would go on to shepherd Invincible showing up and other characters showing up. But yeah, I think as far as Eric Larson and the Savage Dragon were concerned, Youngblood and any characters created by Rob Liefeld, they died when Mars attacked.
That was something I was going to say too. Obviously, this is an Eric Larson show. The Savage Dragon, Super Patriot, Mighty Man are all front and central to this. But everybody else takes the losses. When you see later on in the end when they tally it up, Youngblood dies, which, you get. Rob Liefeld's not going to play in the Sandbox anymore. But it's also the Pact, who I don't remember seeing. I've tried to read the Pact a few times, and for whatever reason, haven't ever gotten through it. And U.S. Mail, they're Valentino guys. Hey, Larson, maybe if this is your baby, maybe one of your. Well, I guess what happens to Libby is really, really bad. But seems like one of your characters should have died. But anyhow, neither here nor there. I like the premise a lot, right? I think it's really fun. I like the way the Mars Attacks guys look. I like the idea of them, getting the drop on Image, even though they take out Stormwatch super easy.
Boom, like that. I'm not a fan of that.
I don't know what Stormwatch was at this point, though, because, this may be right around Stormwatch Aliens when it wasn't what it was. I've read the first, 30 issues of Stormwatch, and it's a very much more powerful, UN-backed, full of money and tech Stormwatch than I think it ends up. So it could be, Darry, do you know more about where Stormwatch would have been in a
Yeah, no, I'm a huge Stormwatch fan. Yeah, it's funny, too, because the space station they have is called Skywatch.
Yeah, Skywatch.
But a main through line in their entire story is that the thing never
the fucking
works.
thing just crashes and gets shot down again.
It does.
It never works because the whole idea is it's 1992. The United Nations got together and was like, we have let's say 3 dozen superheroes from all of our member nations. And we want to be able to send them wherever else. So we need a teleporter. That's what Skywatch is. Skywatch is the satellite that allows them to teleport anywhere all over the world. It's not a Star Destroyer. It's not fighting off. It wasn't invented for that. They know aliens exist, but you got to remember that in the Image universe, the first couple of years, the only real aliens were the Wildcats, and they had been stuck here since ancient Greece. So Skywatch is pointed towards Earth. You know, it's in geosynchronous orbit above the UN.
Well, I guess they're supreme too.
Yeah, right. No, I don't mean to say that there's no other aliens. There's obviously dozens of other aliens.
Right.
I'm just saying that, like, you know, the main influence is the
Sure. Like
Skrull.
they're like Combat and Photon are in Youngblood, but they don't start messing with their guys until later.
Yeah, Cougar's people don't invade Earth until Alan Moore takes over 10 years later. So
well, I don't blame them either.
But Skywatch being taken out in like what almost amounts to an off-panel thing is very in keeping with Stormwatch.
Right. I'm more into like when I read Stormwatch, like the early Stormwatch, Skywatch doesn't get taken down, I think, until like issue 12 or 13 or so. And early on, they're just badass. Here is Jackson King walking around. He has muscles. He has guns. He has a helmet.
Yeah.
You know,
half a helmet. You know, it's open
half
here.
a helmet, right. Well, he's got a psionic blast people too.
Yeah,
that's
he's
right.
not capable. You know, then you've got like Fuji and Hellstrike and Cannon and Diva, and they just look cool and they do cool shit.
Fahrenheit, my favorite.
Fahrenheit rules, right? Winter also. Pretty cool.
Right.
You know, I mean, so I just think that at this point in Stormwatch, because again, like I've read the first 25 or 30 issues, and where I left off. And I didn't leave off for any particular reason. Just sometimes I start reading something, I just read it until I'm tired of it. Where I left off, it was changing more into a less powered version of Stormwatch, which would eventually just get massacred by the aliens, right? The Xenomorphs.
Well, sort of. I mean, Warren Ellis was told this book isn't selling, but we really enjoy it. And he's like, oh, well, it would be nice if I could make you guys some money. So he came up with the Authority.
Right.
How do I get from this book that is backed by the New World Order to the Authority, which is going to be, you know, my postmodern masterpiece? And the answer was, well, we have the aliens license for sale.
Right.
What do you want to do? And it's like, well, can I actually have them kill all the characters I'm not going to use? And Jim Lee, being Jim Lee, was like, yeah, fine. I already sold the whole thing to Time Warner. Go to town.
Yeah, that's in the Stormwatch Aliens crossover. As far as I like the part where like Savage Dragon like backhands a fucking like Martian and just kills him. It's like it makes a noise like brat. I think it's the sound effect. And like honestly, almost everything in these 4 issues is just worth that moment. They mentioned in the first issue too that the Vicious Circles is going to help out their notorious Savage Dragon villains. I'm a big fan of that trope in these situations where in DC's Invasion, a lot of the villains help during the crisis. Several of the villains works with the heroes. Like, listen, I'm not going to be able to, there's no Chicago to take over if the Martians blow it all up. I think my only real issue here is just like, and I'll say this for the whole thing until maybe issue 4, man, there's just a lot of standing around. Other than Shadowhawk and Spawn, most of these guys just sort of stand around. And like, it's also weird to see like Stryker of Cyberforce, Jesse's absolute favorite. So he's finally getting to talk about Cyberforce officially. I don't have to force it in the way I force in the guy from Madison Square Garden with the knife. That guy can force his way anywhere. He's got a knife. He can use it as a weapon.
Oh my gosh.
He can get in there.
Please, any creator out there, just do us a favor and do a 4-issue series on that guy. That's all we want,
Alan Moore, Bill Sienkiewicz, another one of Jesse's favorites.
Yes.
The big numbers team reunited.
If I had unlimited money, I would make the big numbers team do a spin-off comic of that guy from Carnage. Because I feel like just that guy. I don't want you to finish Big Numbers, possibly the greatest comic book of all time. I just want you to do a comic about this random guy. I will pay you whatever you want. And considering Alan Moore once did Spawn Wildcats, and I don't even know what Sienkiewicz is currently doing, I feel like they would be up for it. I feel like I could write them that check.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Ted DiBiase said it best. Everybody's got a price. There's a number.
Price.
Even Alan Moore, and in Alan Moore's case, you'd probably be like, listen, I'll donate money to the Anarchist Magicians Foundation or whatever like charity that he likes. That's the way you would get him, right? You're not going to pay him.
He's got higher standards than that.
Right. So, God damn it, I forgot what the fuck I was talking about, John.
I am making that. I'm making that website, the Anarchist Magicians, the second we're done recording.
It needs to be a prequel, okay? I want the last page, him going into the concerts.
I want there to be additional material for a role-playing game like Watchmen, and that's the only canonical stuff there is. Like, that's it. I remember now, Cyberforce and a lot of guys who operate outside the law seem to be pretty chummy with the soldiers and cops in this, which is pretty interesting.
I was so excited for this comic because I was like, I love Image, but I like crossovers. You know, when is Image going to give me the Infinity Gauntlet? And I saw a bunch of flying saucers.
And you got this.
Listen, this is 1996, 1997. Independence Day had just come out, right?
Fair enough.
You know, I'm a teenager. You're telling me a bunch of superheroes that I like.
No.
You're going to fight aliens? Why? I'll drop $195 for that. And listen, these things came with posters in the middle too. That's
true, and the posters do look really good.
They're nice. Yeah, they're vintage. Again, I'm an Eric Larson fan. If you're not an Eric Larson fan, you're probably not going to enjoy these issues. But if you're an Eric Larson fan, you get 4 good posters. So it's not a bad time.
I'm weird. Like, I'm not a huge Eric Larson fan. I don't dislike it. I get why people do like it. It's just never quite clicked for me when I read the actual work. But I love his posters, like the cards he's drawn, the posters and stuff. Like, I love that stuff. But in his like actual comic book work, like, you know, chronological storytelling, for whatever reason, it doesn't come across to me.
One guy I'm not lukewarm on, and that's Eric Larson. I enjoy. Right. I enjoy me some Eric Larson.
I'll drink the lukewarm tea for Eric Larson. No, for real. I just, it doesn't click for me. It's one of those things like I can tell it's good, but it's not for me. You know, but the posters are great.
I think for Larson, for me, it comes down to, I knew I liked his stuff before I had ever really studied Kirby. But once you study Kirby, I can't see anything else from Larson. You know, there's that energy. The characters have to constantly be moving. But at the same time, you know, Larson only does the one comic. He just does Savage Dragon. As far as I know, it still comes out. So to your point, it's not always of the highest quality, but I still like it because I've been reading it for so long, and at this point, I know what he's going for. So I think I give him a lot of leeway. I don't know if I've ever mentioned this on the show before, but literally the first comic I ever read that I received that started this whole thing was an Eric Larson Amazing Spider-Man comic. So the man.
So we have him to blame.
Yeah, exactly. The man holds a special place in my heart, and you know, assuming he hasn't committed some terrible crime, he'll always be on the top shelf for me. But I wish he had drawn more of this series. Like, I don't know if he drew the Savage Dragon, Mars Attacks the Savage Dragon, but man, if he had drawn these 4 issues, I feel like they would have aged better.
Honestly, Eric Larson, for me, I will never dislike him as a person, though, because he's very principled and believes everything he says and is willing to defend it, even if you don't agree or whatever. But also that he loves Nova, and I love Nova. I think Nova's like the best. It's cool as fuck. Got a cool fucking helmet. That's probably my favorite Eric Larson stuff is the Nova series he did in the late 90s.
When
he was working back for Marvel again too. That his Defenders, I actually really like his Defenders.
His Defenders run is great. Yeah.
Him and Busiek.
Busiek, yeah.
So those, you know, it's funny. I'm like, I like Eric Larson as long as he's not doing his, you know, prized character, the Savage Dragon. Also, like, with the Savage Dragon, I always call him the Savage Dragon, but is that like my friend Matthew Price, who I always refer to as Matthew Price?
First and last name only.
Should I just call him Dragon? But I always call him the Savage Dragon.
Yeah, I call him Officer Dragon. I mean, that's technically his name in the comics, but yeah, to your point, I mean, and they even said this on the animated series, like, no one ever calls him that. His legal name is just Dragon for some reason.
Mars Attacks the Savage Dragon. That is actually a Topps comic. That came out December of 96 as well. Exact same time. And penciled by, and now I've never heard this name, so Darry, you may have Claude St. Aubin.
No.
All right. No. Me either.
Oh, you don't know my boy Claude?
Moving on.
but Mars Attacks Image definitely has the feel of like a rush job. And I don't mean to say that anyone turned in less than 100% of the effort. That is not what I mean. I just mean that this comic, it skips around a lot. I don't know how familiar Giffen was with literally dozens of relatively new characters.
Right. That's what I meant by saying Cyberforce seemed really chummy with you know, for being a paramilitary group that's like painted as terrorists, by Cyberdata.
Yeah, Lord Emp is in the White House for some reason. There's a lot going on.
He's on the phone with Bill Clinton.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a weird book. But again, it's not bad, because one of the things Giffen does, and I was going to mention this later, but I'll insert it here, is, you mentioned DC's Invasion. This thing is almost a photocopy of that, but that's not bad. That's not a slight. I love that story. I think that's one of the best crossovers DC's ever done, but it's got the same general premise, where in that comic, for those of you who haven't read it, the Thanagarians, the Hawkmen, and a bunch of other races who were less popular, they decide to all attack Earth at the same time for the same reason. The superhuman population is getting to critical mass, and they're worried what's going to happen once we get interstellar travel. Same way here, it ends with us having more superhumans than when we started, but Giffen was involved with that. I think Giffen worked with Bill Mantlo on that, and a lot of this.
He did, yeah.
Exactly.
Last word.
Yeah, exactly. And Mantlo, is a treasure in superhero comics, but Mars Attacks Image has a lot of the same beats, and it just has that feeling of, hey, listen, this needs to get out. This Tim Burton movie will have either been in theaters or quickly be on home media. All the Image partners are fighting with each other. Please get this thing out as quickly as possible. But again, I really do feel like that doesn't take away from anything, because Dean, you mentioned a lot of characters standing around. This comic is clearly a bunch of cameos. Like, Witchblade is in it for one scene for some reason, and all she does is direct the characters towards somewhere in New York that you think is safe.
Times Square.
Yeah, right. Times Square, the least defensible place on the entire island, Times Square, which is completely open, which has streets everywhere, which literally, I'm no military strategist.
Debris that could fall at any time if you just shot it. Oh man, there's only 93 400-inch TVs up there to fall on.
Literally,
there is a jolly
place.
Though, so at least you have some food.
Yeah, exactly. You're not going to run out of food. But the only other thing I'll go back to is these first two issues and the standing around thing. One of my favorite crossovers is Final Crisis from DC, and
so Morrison, you're the one.
I am the one person, and no one else I know likes that series, but it's me. Grant Morrison always talks about the fact that the story jumps around a lot, and that was intentional, because when you have this many characters and this much action, you can't focus on one for too long. You want to see everything else, and your brain kind of fills in the gaps, like when you're switching channels on a TV, or you used to back in the day. We're all old. And I get a similar feeling here, but I like it because Giffen doesn't focus on any one character for too long. He jumps around, and as a result, you get to see different perspectives of the entire battle. So when you get the real, pumped up President Pullman speech at the end, where it's like, oh, hey, we're going to fight the invaders off, you almost buy it because he's tricked you into knowing all the different characters, even though you didn't spend a lot of time with them. Or at least it worked on 12-year-old.
Well, see, that's going back to what you said about it being like Invasion, that's part of my problem with it is and I do think it hits a lot of the same notes, and I do think it feels very similar, but it's like the Kids Bop version of Invasion. It's not quite there. It just doesn't quite land the same way it did. I think my big problem with the guys standing around, and I guess they were going for this, like you said, in more of a movie sense, not unlike Independence Day. But I'm used to superhero crossovers where at the end, they're all together. Here's Wetworks and Wildstar and Cyberforce, and they're all shoulder to shoulder. Like at the end of Endgame, where they're all fighting against the same guys, and they're all finally in the same place doing this. And without that, and it doesn't have that. It has, like you said, you see all the pockets of stuff, where these people are fighting. Without that, it doesn't land for me. And maybe I'm just basic. You know what I mean? I'm like, this doesn't use the normal trope, but I wanted that. This made me want that. And I feel like I didn't quite get it.
I agree with you, but I think there's a reason for that, because I agree. I wanted that. I think this idea of the Image universe, it doesn't exist, right?
So you think there's a meta reason for this?
There's a meta, yeah, exactly. Okay. There's a meta reason behind this. This idea of the Image universe that I wanted and you guys wanted, it doesn't exist, because at the end of the day, the whole point of Image is the company only owns that logo. Everyone owns their own thing, and we see that here when his closest friends decide to murder Youngblood. Like, they could have very easily just not acknowledged the character, but this is a kind of pretty petty thing to do to a guy you used to work with, and from everything I've read was pretty instrumental in forming your cool company. But like this idea,
they broke bread together.
Yeah, they did a lot of stuff together. And whether or not I think Rob Liefeld is a good creator or a good person or whatever else, I mean, that's beside the point. Like, that's a pretty petty thing to do. You could have just not acknowledged him. But this idea of the Image universe doesn't really exist, right? Because I'll give you a perfect example. I'm a huge Spawn fan, and this book came out. Issue 4 comes out in 1997. 1997 would see the release of the Spawn movie, and for that movie, they had to replace the Youngblood Rob Liefeld character of Chapel with Jessica Priest. Chapel becomes Priest, a brand new character, because they no longer had access to the Rob Liefeld stuff. And it's this idea that, like, to contrast with the Marvel universe that would come later when it was adapted to screen, everything in the Image universe is owned by a separate person.
Right.
So Mars Attacks Image can never have that great good moment, because most of these characters, they're never going to interact again. Witchblade's never going to hang out with Cyberforce again. It's just maybe
Witchblade could. Sylvestri owns both of them, right? Like a bad example.
Excuse me. Not Cyberforce. I meant Wetworks. You are absolutely right. I've actually got a bunch of comics where Witchblade, the Darkness, and Ripclaw all hang out. So I do apologize for that.
That's the triumvirate we've all been fucking waiting.
Right.
The Darkness is the best comic of all time, people. I'm just saying.
I think it makes a good.
You say that all the time. Like, Invincible's the best comic of all time.
I do. I say that all the time.
Best comic of all time. Slapstick, best comic of all time.
Slapstick.
Flair from Heroic Comics, best comic of all time. Team Anarchy, Dagger Comics, best comic of all time. That's Darry. No, you're not as bad as all that. But Slapstick is great.
Slapstick is a good comic.
Really great stuff. Yeah, I think that's a really awesome postmodern way to interpret this clash of intellectual property. But for me, I wanted Wetworks to stand side by side with Witchblade, whether they ever would again. And like, I wanted Impact to throw the Max into like a fucking, flying saucer, and this just doesn't happen. I will say that, like, you do get to see a lot of people do some cool stuff. I like the Mighty Man story, which is where, like, Mighty Man is actually, it's a take on the Captain Marvel Shazam, and, like, Mighty Man is actually a lady who's a nurse, and she's like, I gotta nurse these people. And I understand why she would be conflicted there, but ultimately, Barbaric and, who is that with Barbaric? Ricochet. They should to make the right choice, get them to make the right choice, and they turn into Mighty Man. And then, honestly, the way they portray it, if Mighty Man just had another 20 minutes, he'd have ended the whole fucking thing himself. And I really like that. It's a great treatment of one of my favorite pastiches of all time. I like the Mighty Man costume. I like the way, I like how seriously, like when Mighty Man shows up, like the world kind of almost stops. It's like, and just flying like literally through saucers. And great moments. Super Patriot, doesn't he get elected to lead the heroes in the first 2 issues? Does that happen in issue 2?
I think that's issue 3.
I think that happens in the back half, because that's like the big climax thing,
right?
Where it's
you open issue 3 and Super Patriot's like, you want me to what?
Right. Okay.
What do you mean?
I couldn't remember exactly, because again, like I'm not reading them physically. It kind of runs together. So that's all I can really remember from issue 1 or 2. I'll be interested to hear your notes, and I will cut y'all off when I'm ready to talk.
Well, that's
whatever
fine.
You're saying, yeah. So
that's
go ahead, Jesse.
Fine. All right. So
another thing I wanted to say was I'll cut this. Go ahead.
So yeah, I've got a few notes, stuff that kind of ties in with what you're saying. So I won't belabor all that stuff again. But we didn't mention how Grunge is an idiot. I didn't realize that he was that stupid.
I forgot about that. Forgot about that one there, buddy. Like,
he is an idiot.
Just like, this is on all the channels. It must be fake.
That's like what sorry, Grunge.
Like, you don't have to be the genius that Fairchild is, to know that this might be real.
Right.
Also,
right.
I think Gen 13 might get treated like the best of anybody who's not an Eric Larson property here. Although Spawn looks pretty good, blowing shit up with a howitzer.
I was gonna say he actually did a save at one point too. Right.
What's that?
he does a save at one point too. I mean, yeah. So Spawn gets definitely some good treatment here. Grunge does not. I mean, unless he's that. I've read some Gen 13 comics, but is that how he is portrayed all the time? Is that much of an idiot?
The idea is that the five of them they're teenagers, right? So they're all teenagers, and they each take one stereotype teenage attribute and they bring it to 11. And grunge is, I'm 15, 16 years old. I'm thinking about one thing. It's not what's going on in the rest of the world.
Got it.
But yeah. I agree. I think Gen 13 was done particularly well, whether it's just because it's easy to write super powered teenagers or what, I don't know. But I thought they did pretty well. Later on, Free Fall ruins a flying saucer by
that's
just
a really
typing.
funny moment.
Yeah, by randomly just
and also
typing on.
Gets the right-wing propaganda going. She's like, you should speak English if you're here. Lady,
yeah, what was that? I had a note about that. That was rough. Yeah, I was expecting that. I guess she's like an entitled woman. I never really thought of her character that way, but
I don't think that statement was sadly much less controversial at the time.
Oh, that's interesting.
This is a time when Rush Limbaugh is on TV and syndicated TV in lots of markets, and there's not really been a big cultural pushback on that yet. So, this was, growing up in Arkansas, y'all grew up somewhere different, but this was not an uncommon sentiment to hear, and people did not push back on it. And sadly, it is a sentiment that I would have made as an ignorant young man, dumber than grunge in many ways. But okay, let me ask you this: you said they're all one of these teenage stereotypes pushed to 11. So what's Fairchild because she does it all, right? Is she just the prom queen?
Well, no. It's the opposite. Fairchild is to the point we were talking about before. Fairchild is Captain Marvel, right? Because Fairchild's origin is she's very smart and she's very shy and she's very self-conscious, and then she gets gen activated and she turns into Wonder Woman. She turns into being the strongest, most durable superhero in the Wildstorm universe. And I think that's a really interesting attribute because her defining characteristics are still she's smarter than everyone else. She's the team leader, which was a rarity at the time, but also she's a nerd, and I mean that in the classic.
That's what I'm trying to get at. I don't mean prom queen just that, but when I went to school, our prom queen was also finished third in the class, was the captain of the basketball team. Also the one of the prettiest ladies, young ladies in the school. So I thought it was more like that. But we're talking about grunge. You're okay, he's the stoner guy from Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Yeah. What's Fairchild? Because she kind of defies it now because she's super hot, super cool, super smart. That's what I was like.
Well, but she's still self-conscious.
Okay, there you go. That's what I was.
Yeah, to me, the defining characteristic of Fairchild isn't all those things you just listed, because it's still the fact that she's self-conscious. There's a great storyline once Wildstorm.
So she is the epitome of teenage insecurity.
Yes, that's what I would say her defining characteristic is. She woke up one day to look like Wonder Woman with red hair, but she would still say, okay, yes, but what if everyone is talking about me when I'm not there? What if I'm not good enough? What if I get abandoned by my teammates and everyone else? And so she overcompensates for that. Yeah, I would say her arc is that she has everything you would think she would want, but she is still incredibly insecure about that because she's the smartest person in the room 99 times out of 100.
Yeah, no, I'm just asking because I haven't read a lot of Gen 13, and I can see what you're saying from appearance's sake, but you couldn't figure that out if you just looked at a J. Scott Campbell pin-up.
No, and by the way, I'm not. You couldn't figure this out if you actually read these things. I have read almost every Wildstorm comic ever published. Most of them are terrible, and a lot of this comes later.
More like shitstorm, am I right?
I love Wildstorm. Other than Marvel, it's probably my favorite consistent publishing company. But a lot of this stuff is very bad. The Gen 13 characters lucked out because they became super popular immediately because of how great at the time J. Scott Campbell was and how popular he was, but the characters didn't get a lot of development, but they worked into the continuity and they would show up other places. Fairchild would have this great crossover with Superman.
That is good.
Yeah, and I always tell people, I'm like, listen, DC does very little with Wildstorm. I know they love The Midnighter and Apollo and those characters are great. Honestly, throw Fairchild on the Justice League. She checks so many boxes. She'd be a great addition to that, and you get a nice bit of 90s nostalgia.
At least Teen Titans.
Oh, yeah, fine. Great.
I mean, like, no. I mean, I think Justice League, what you're saying is true there, but like, you know, if you're like, well, she's not quite Justice League ready. Was she ready for Teen Titans? You want to bring back Young Justice? Call it Gen Justice.
If you told me the former leader of Gen 13 were leading Young Justice, that gets added to my pull list. I don't care who's writing or drawing it. That's beautiful.
Wow.
Well, unlucky you, that's coming out, and it's me doing both.
I did have down here just to, again, support your point, Dean. Dragon is a hard ass throughout this whole thing. I should say that I think it might be something that you had mentioned there earlier, Dean, about how the Martians can use like some kind of chemical or something to embiggen insects into huge, like they spray it over New York City and all of a sudden like there's these huge insects all over the place. Ants.
Roaches,
yeah. So that's one of their weapons. Okay.
Which goes all the way back to the trading cards. That's part of the story arc of the original trading cards too. And honestly, pretty horrifying. You know, like I said, I don't want to fight a giant ant. I don't want to fight a giant roach.
Nope. I'll pass.
But what they really should have done was like, maybe they was worried that they couldn't control them. But like, if you really wanted to horrify people and kill as many people as possible, man, you head down south and you enlarge one of those big old fucking hornet's nests and those big red wasps. Man, they're terrible. Like they would sting you. It'll hurt for days. You make them really big, they'll fucking like. I mean, they would overrun the world in like 8 minutes because they're just so nasty.
That's scary.
Have you ever seen a big red wasp?
Not a big red wasp.
Look up a red wasp sometime, and like I'm telling you, they're like an inch and a half long, and like a lot of it stinger. So make those things big, and they're really like they will follow somebody for I think like a quarter of a mile away from their nest.
Ooh.
They used to get into my house, and I used to like practice swinging my baseball bat. And like I knew that if I could hit one of them as they came, I was like, I'm having a good game. And you hear this nice ting. Darry is horrified, by the way.
I just looked up red wasp, and yeah, this is some kaiju looking stuff right here.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. They should have enlarged these guys, not those giant Japanese hornets. They don't need any help. They could have just like made a few more of them and just done it. You ain't gotta make them bigger. Yeah, but these make them giant. They would have handled it. I'm going to be quiet in case the Martians are listening.
Don't be giving them any ideas.
Right.
Kill Cat and Kid Avenger. They're bungling ways here in these first two issues.
My initial reaction, who?
Yeah. I remember the Deadly Duo. I remember this is a Larson thing. I'm pretty certain because I remember seeing them in Savage Dragon at one point. Deadly Duo number 2, by Eric Larson, it looks like, has those two guys on the front and Maul standing behind him. Looked like he's going to probably mess them up pretty bad. But yeah, these guys, okay.
Good, he should.
Yeah, these guys are idiots.
Sorry, these guys are a waste of time.
They are idiots, and they take up, there's actually, a big portion of this book, actually a big portion of the side plot, a big side plot of this book, is they're trying to figure out a way to disable the main, base in Detroit, if I remember correctly. So, but Kill Cat and Kid Avenger are idiots, complete idiots.
I just think they take up listen, this is Mars Attacks Image. And when people who bought this, a lot of them, obviously, Darry was one of them. They wanted something, that I don't think they quite got. And part of it was because of the focus on these two. And maybe they focused on these two because they could control them more. But I would have replaced every panel that these guys were in with Wetworks shooting guys. Just big fucking chain gun shooting guys. And I feel like that would have been better. I feel like it would have been more what people wanted. You say Image, these are I wouldn't have known to name the Deadly Duo. These would have been I couldn't have named it. They would have made the list. You know what I mean? So I just think the focus so much on these guys is a little misleading for the title. It feels like this should have happened in Mars Attacks the Savage Dragon.
I agree that having them take up so much space is a waste and not worth the time, considering that you clearly had access to all these characters. You had the Ninja Turtles show up for a single panel. If you had access to them, I don't know why you wouldn't use more.
Use them.
But there is one.
Well, that may have been all the permission they could get. Gary Carlson.
Sure. Who knows? But my point is, you clearly had access to to better characters, to characters who had cartoons and whatever else. And the main thrust of the back half is 5 characters that no one outside of us 3 are ever going to talk about ever again. You had the Deadly Duo, Super Patriots Kids, and Lab Man, who I'm sure we'll get to. But
sadly,
there is one interesting aspect about the Deadly Duo that I enjoyed back in the day and enjoyed again at the reread, is they're almost the R2 and 3PO of the adventure, right? They are not top tier superheroes. They are not going to have an HBO cartoon based on them or a big screen movie or anything like that. They're not joining Youngblood. They are superheroes from Detroit.
Youngblood's dead, to be fair. No one's joining.
Yes. You are absolutely right. There no longer is the ability to join Youngblood or Team Youngblood. But my point is, like, these 2 characters who are bad at being superheroes actually do save the day. So if you don't know that they're pre-existing characters from a book you haven't read and aren't going to read, they almost feel that, like, the droids are getting into trouble kind of vibe. Because in the second half of the book, Super Patriot, who's written to be this Captain America character, even says, like, I don't know why we're suddenly winning, but we have to press the advantage. And the reveal to the reader is that, well, one of the Deadly Duo figured out how to blow up the shield generator they didn't even know was there. So it's this thing of, like, well, if I'm going to follow the adventures of anyone, I'd like to be someone who is kind of low to the ground because they have the same stakes that I do. So I appreciate it from that point of view, but I agree with both of you. A complete waste of pages.
I would have rather seen more from Super Patriots Kids earlier, because when they have the Martians, like, rape Libby, which is what happens, I don't like it. I don't think you could make it worthwhile, but, like, in a way, it's almost like that character just shows up for that to happen. If you could have had some subplots going on in 1 or 2 with those 2, maybe I would care more, if that makes sense. Instead of it just being like, oh, so this is what we're doing now. You're like, oh, this is terrible. This is a character I care a lot about. And you might care a lot about this character if you're reading Savage Dragon. This motherfucker wasn't. So this is, so you probably should have given me more reason for that horrible event to mean more than just seeming like a horrible thing to happen to a lady in a superhero story, which I don't have to tell y'all is something that, like, people, the creators just like to do for whatever reason for a long time. And that's how it comes across later, because I don't know who she is or know much about her.
I agree, and you make a really good point. Super Patriots Kids are Justice and Liberty. They're characters I don't know anything about. And if they had been the primary POV characters through most of the 4 issues, you could have given them a lot of the exposition, a lot of the other stuff. Then what happens in issue 4, while I do not enjoy reading that at all in the slightest, and I think it's unnecessary, it would have held a little bit more weight because, to your point, you don't really meet these characters until the very end, and you don't even know who they are. So it's almost
I don't know what their powers are.
Right.
Now, like later on, Justice, like, ninja chops a guy.
Oh yeah, heads are flying off the Martians
right,
out of
but,
that
like,
room.
at that point, I don't know what he is, other than he looks like a cross between, like, General Glory and Captain Dave Osborne.
Yeah.
Nice, very nice.
You got to take those Captain Dave Osborne references where you can get them.
Where you can get them. Yeah, I agree.
Might have been Super Dave. I can't remember. Anyhow, it doesn't matter. Y'all know who I mean.
I know who you meant. I'm with you. I'm with you on this journey.
Weird way to end issue 2, if that is the actual ending, because who knows? I don't know if we're missing a page or not. With a big close-up on Bill Clinton's eye, and then that's it. Like, I was just like, I mean, I understand. It's a pretty dire situation. We're getting that across. Bill Clinton is hiding in whatever the place is called, Cheyenne something.
It should just be NORAD. It's weird that, like, they don't know NORAD.
Right. But regardless, Bill Clinton is sitting there.
Maybe NORAD doesn't exist in the Image universe that got attacked by the Martians, where there's no longer a young blood.
I really do think that Keith Giffen wrote this like on his way to hand it in. So I think he couldn't remember the word for like NORAD, and he was just like, it's in Cheyenne Mountain, right? Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good.
He had his invasion scripts like on one knee, and on the other knee he was frantically penciling in like, put character that makes sense here, because he had never read Wetworks before. I've never read Wetworks before. I'm not faulting him for that, but
so
that's too bad. It's a masterpiece.
I guarantee you, it'd be your next favorite book.
I like Will.
It would be. Listen. It could be Cyberforce for you, the way Cyberforce is.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, honestly, not a masterpiece, but like it looks good, and some guys have giant guns and they shoot werewolves. So if you like Wildcats, you'll like it. I know their premises aren't the same, but like as far as just wild action with good looking art, that's what it is. That's what it is.
Sounds good.
Less covert, more action.
That's all
Same
the notes
team.
I
I mentioned this before, but I really, truly love the insert poster for issue number 2. It is drawn by Eric Larson, and it features a scene that never appears in the comic. And I had this thing hanging on my wall for at least 10 years. It's Dragon, Spawn, Fairchild, Shadowhawk, and maybe a few other characters. They're all in New York because you see the Empire State Building in the background. The entire city is being destroyed by what is clearly the laser from Independence Day, and the ships that are flying around them do not in any way resemble the flying saucers from Mars Attacks. So it's just one of these things where it's like, I don't know if Larson drew this before the book was finalized or after, and he didn't care, but the image is great, and everyone should get it and put it on their wall.
But that's the thing. That's the moment I'm waiting for in the goddamn book. That moment never happened, and that's the moment I want. Like, yeah. I want fucking Fairchild to lift the Savage Dragon and throw him into like a fucking flying saucer, and it just doesn't happen.
There is a severed hand just randomly floating at the bottom of that.
In the midst.
That's a Youngblood cameo.
That's rough. I had a random question. I don't know if you guys are going to know this. I don't know if anyone knows this. But on the very first page of issue 1, when the Martians are doing their exposition, they talk about an unmanned probe that arrived on Mars and made them start to consider this whole nonsense. I don't remember that being a plot point. I don't remember if that was something that they made up. Do either of you have any idea if that's ever referenced again? I didn't think it was.
I don't think so.
When I was reading it, I thought it was something that actually happened in real life.
I thought it was a real thing. I didn't look it up, but yeah. Around that time, we landed some guy on Mars to take some $70,000 pictures.
Oh, never mind. That makes way more sense. Yeah. Okay.
But I didn't double check that. It could very well be a lie.
No. Of course. I mean, like, now that I've said it out loud, it's like, yeah, that makes sense that would have been news at the time. One of the things I just wanted to mention real quick is, we mentioned Mars Attacks and Wally Wood, and I forget the name of the person who actually drew most of the original 55 Mars Attacks trading cards, but I just love the design work. The Martians themselves, the armada, the flying saucers, it's all very simple, it's all very iconic, and it's all very different from all the Image characters who were featured here. Like, it's a really good, it's like when all the Marvel characters fight the Skrulls. Like, who's the bad guy? Well, it's the person with green skin with pointy ears, and it's the same thing here. Like, you get a really good villain that can be adapted to a lot of different things. I thought that was really well done. It's one of the reasons I liked this so much when it originally came out. I just thought, like, oh, okay, great. A flying saucer is going to blow up a building with innocent people in it. So when Spawn or Stryker shoot it down, I thought it really accomplished its goal. The other thing I'll just mention very quickly is I have no idea why giant insects attack New York, but I love that. I love that Spawn, who's just this creepy, eerie type of guy, really the same influences as Mars Attacks itself, the old EC comics. It's just, you know what? You're not dealing with science fiction. You can't deal with science fiction. You get to deal with magic crap. And the Witchblade shows up later. She's a magic character. So I just, that tickled me. I enjoyed that.
I mean, I think the reason that there's giant ants and roaches in New York City is because, again, this is something the Martians do. And I think there are just, believe it or not, lots of vermin in New York City. I know that's a shocker, but and I honestly think that, if you think about this from a psychological warfare perspective, if you live in a larger city, particularly in New York City, this stuff is always around you, no matter, even if you live in the nicest penthouse. So this is almost like the personification of a very horrific fear that is real around you, that this vermin could overtake you at any time if you're not careful. Well, now it doesn't matter how careful you are because they're 3 stories tall. And Norman Saunders is the guy with Wally Wood. It's Wally Wood and Norman Saunders who did the 62 card set.
Oh, okay. All right.
So, and great work too.
So let me get back to my notes here. I think that was all that I had. It's just a weird way to end the issue too. We got close up on Bill Clinton's eye.
But that makes a lot of sense too, because that's kind of the whole, like, again, Bill Sienkiewicz did some of this art. I mean, I don't know exactly which
I wanted to ask you, can we stop real quick and ask you what your thoughts are here on the art?
This art's rough. I got to be honest with you. This
right.
art's rough. I had remembered this as being totally drawn by Eric Larson, and that is not in any way the case. This art is rough.
There's a couple of splash pages that are just focused on one person. When we get multiple people involved, it really takes a downturn. But when you clearly I'm at the second page of issue 1 where you got a full page of one of the Martians pointing and directing, and that looks good in my opinion.
If what we're surmising is correct and they were rushing this story, I think the art looks a little rushed as well. I also think it looks like they were trying to tap into it's almost like an Eric Larson meets the Battle Chasers Joe Madureira. I can't pronounce the gentleman's last name.
Joey Mad.
Joey Mad. It looks like they're going for some kind of amalgamation between those styles, and I don't think they quite get there. I don't think the art is terrible, but I've certainly seen better art.
Okay.
I feel like this is one of the first times that someone, whoever was drawing this book, decided I need to show Spawn in the daylight, because in Spawn's own book, he almost always goes out at night.
Right.
And, I was reading this and I was like, why does Spawn look so different? And I realized, because he has high contrast, because he's well lit, because the reds are popping, the green of his eyes are popping, the white on his mask. It's like he's running around like an actual superhero as opposed to a creature of the night. I just really appreciated that, because there's so many issues of his solo series where McFarlane and Capullo and others would just draw him basically as part of the background scenery, that actually seeing him here as just a straight up superhero, even if it's only for a couple of pages, was kind of rewarding, because it's oh yeah, that is what he would look like, running alongside Freak Force and Cyberforce. So.
Yeah, too bad he wasn't driving the Spawn mobile.
Oh, if only. The Spawnmobile, the greatest vehicle in image continuity.
Spawnmobile.
The Spawnmobile. I love it. That series was great, because Spawn had a car for some reason, but his arch enemy Violator also had a motorcycle, because just God bless the 90s. God bless it.
Let me start with my notes here on issues 3 and 4. So yeah, we talked about Super Patriot. We opened the book with Super Patriot having an issue with leading. Some guy by the name of Jake shows up. So anybody want to shed some light on? Obviously, he's somebody that's been an antagonist to Super Patriot, but I don't know the specifics. Anybody know the specifics?
Maybe if you've been reading, I've never read Freak Force. I've read the first 2 issues a couple times. I don't know who this guy is.
There's definitely some animosity. Yeah. So Jake shows up in here for all you fans of Jake.
Jake from State Farm. He's very mad about it.
Justice, Liberty, the Deadly Duo, and Lab Man.
So
I want to know, did you know about this guy? You know who this dude is?
No, I knew nothing.
Okay.
I knew who he was when I saw him.
All right, tell me about it.
Once I looked at a picture of him, I don't know anything other than I was like, oh, that is a magic guy. I remember seeing him on some Fox special, because that's what Fox showed then. The CW does it now, that Penn and Teller Pula. Well, and Masters of Illusion, which is just putting ladies in boxes. That's the only trick those guys do on that show. Put a lady in a box, stab some swords, open the box, she's not there, pull the swords out, now she's back. This guy did a show on one or a bit on one of those type of shows on Fox. I remember seeing him. That's it though. I just recognized the hair because
if you don't think I immediately went to YouTube and watched some of what Lab Man does, which looked really kooky and crazy, but I did notice that the first one I looked at was, I think, from the Fox special. This is a real person that had a comic book. Rudy Kobe. That's Rudy, and then Kobe spelled Coby. Rudy Kobe's Lab Man. He's one of these guys that's helping out the Deadly Duo and Justice and Libby. I had no idea this existed.
Me neither.
There are comics. This guy is an actual dude. It was so funny because when I typed in,
he like wrote his comics, right?
So he wrote his own comics. It was weird because I type in his name and I'm trying to find the comic, and this real guy shows up and he looks like the dude in the comic, and I'm like, what the hell is going on here? So to find out that this guy actually exists and is part of this comic, but he's played off. Of course, he was a comedian as well in real life, and in this, he's pretty much he's played off as kind of a joke, and he definitely belongs with the Deadly Duo, in my opinion.
Why is his name Lab Man?
Because he wears a lab coat.
He does like weird experiments.
Okay, so he looks like
that's part of his act.
All right.
It's complete nonsense, but it's also one of the things that the Image universe could do that the other guys couldn't. Because Image's whole thing was like, hey, do you have an idea for a comic? Are you going to produce it yourself? Great, we will publish it. And, for this random summer in 1996, 1997, we will also have you fight a bunch of Martian invaders. And this guy showed up, and this guy was like, yeah, you know what? Why not? Why not, right? I mean, listen, I can't imagine he would have shown up.
Talk about an evening at the Improv.
Why not? You're going to do the work. You're going to show up. And Eric Larson was probably like, yeah, why not? Okay, you might be on TV. You might be a big deal. Let me throw you in. And again, it's like he's got one thing to do. He's got to get them into the mothership. He does that very well. And then that's it. It's not like we're forced to go with him on this great journey.
They are wondering if he is trying to run off at one point, but he's like, no, I'm trying to find a way out for all of us. And but yeah, he gets them in there, and he tries to get them out according to him.
He does eventually get them out. It takes him a little bit, but like when they escape their cell, it's because he figured out how to do it.
Okay, way to go, Lab Man.
He says there's a line where they're like, "It took you long enough." He's like, "It's Martian technology." I gotta be on his side about that. Like, he didn't have an Apple computer like Jeff Goldblum did in Independence Day, which would somehow effortlessly interface with this stuff. Yeah. All he had was his hair, his dream, and a joke.
Yeah, that's the best part about the Image universe is like anyone who even thinks they could be a superhero, they get at least one shot. It's the barrier to entry is very low, and I'm about it. And also the stakes are real because a bunch of people in this comic get murdered. Maybe none of the marquee characters. This is not the entire.
No marquee characters, just Youngblood.
Right. I mean, yeah. I guess in the context of the story, they are killed, but it's not like you have Shaft valiantly bringing down a Martian saucer with his stringless bow.
Just a discarded Youngblood air conditioner apparently laying in the background.
It's so total too. Like they don't only show Youngblood being killed off panel in the first issue. They make a point of having a character look directly at the reader of the fourth issue and say, Youngblood is dead. Rob Liefeld is no longer welcome. And I almost expected someone to list all the characters that were in that building, just so Supreme, Battlestone, they were all in that building. They were all killed by Martian invaders. They will never appear in an Image comic again. Go find Awesome. Leave me alone.
Well, listen. We only know Youngblood's dead. Brigade, Blood's apparently made it out. Yeah. Supreme could be around.
There's actually a little bit of continuity that helps correct that. When Alan Moore takes over writing Supreme, he introduces the Supremacy. Right. And he says that it's basically the earliest version or an earlier version of the Spider-Verse, where it's like, okay, every version of the character exists, and sometimes they hang out with each other. I'm 100% sure that somewhere in the background of that, there is the hard-ass, incredibly powerful, takes no crap early 90s version of Supreme, who was like, yeah, I blew up a bunch of flying saucers and then I decided forget those guys and I just came here. So without
actually,
I'm sure
in Supremacy, they wind up Eric Larson does Supreme again.
Yeah, right.
And he actually, the early 90s Supreme is in there and they let him out and he depowers the rest of the Supremacy and it's fine.
Yeah.
Obviously, I prefer Alan Moore's version, but that's like being you know what? I would rather have, a New York strip at Morton's instead of the Waffle House. What I mean? It's what do you I love the Waffle House.
It's fine.
No, that's a really good example. Yeah. It's listen, sometimes I just want to read an issue of Savage Dragon. Other times I need a little bit of V for Vendetta. It's what do you feel like? What do you feel like sinking your teeth into?
Dean, what do you think about issue 4's cover? This is the one where Justice is holding Libby.
Justice and Liberty.
It appears to be the an homage to the Supergirl Superman, right? Like the Crisis, like this is Crisis on Earth image, as it were. I like Maul, and he's on it. That's really funny to say, but like, I like him.
Where's
He's
my
standing back there.
Cyberforce guy?
There's some more guys standing around. So do what?
Impact's back there.
Right. The Capitol's burning, which is interesting because in issue 4, U.S. mail dies protecting the U.S. Constitution, which is, I guess it's supposed to be poetic, but I'm so jaded now. I'm like, why did the Martians want it? It's just a goddamn piece of paper to them, right? Like, what do they care? Like, you know, I mean, like, was this like a moral victory? But U.S. mail dies being a U.S. mail, I guess. You definitely feel it, though, a little bit. Super Patriot, or I think, who is it? It's Backlash that discovers him, right?
Yeah, Backlash.
And he's like, I
man,
can't believe
bodies
this.
everywhere. Bodies everywhere, and finds him back. Like, what's he? Oh, man.
The
U.S. mail.
He just killed 93 Martians. But, like, why didn't he leave with it? I would have left with it. I'd have found something else. But I like the Capitol burning on there because it evokes that image. Obviously, it's trying to play, like I said, it's playing on that Supergirl, Superman, George Perez image, and it's supposed to, we're all supposed to feel, this tremendous sense of loss, which I would have had I known any more about Liberty. As it is, I think it's a good cover. I think it's very representative of what happens in the issue. I would buy that at $1, Ben, on the cover alone.
All right.
Buy that.
All right. I like it. I like it. So
I would have bought it off the shelf because it was number 4. If the other 3 weren't there, I'm like, I'm not hopping into this.
I hear that. Oh, so my next note is, oh man, poor Liberty.
Oh,
so,
Jesus.
The Martians capture Killcat, well, the deadly duo, Justice, Liberty, and Labman. We already kind of talked about that, but they take Liberty off, and Justice is like, as they're trying to escape, he's trying to find out where she's at, and then he finally finds her, but what he finds is that she has been subject to some Martian experiments.
They make it very clear that she is just raped again and again. This is not ambivalent. At one point, they're talking about, like, can't believe these volunteers coming in here for this bestiality. The real alien stories, a lot of people say they're probed. They get, like, sexually explored, etc. That's a common thing. I think this is it. I think it makes sense within that context, but it's really just a horrific scene that, the aliens had already killed, according to, like, their fucking, like, numbers, like 68% of the planet or something.
Right,
and they destroyed like 70% of the livestock, so there's going to be a famine when this is done. Like, all this shit. Like, I don't need this to, like, know how terrible the aliens are at this point. And honestly, you could just hint that this could happen without doing it to, tie into all those alien UFO stories like we saw in Unsolved Mysteries. No, I think it's gratuitous and just pretty much unnecessary, and just it really, really hasn't aged well, especially considering I don't know much about her. Then all she is afterwards is catatonic. It seems to be for no other reason, although Darry, knowing more about its continuity, apparently does have somewhat more of a reason. I don't think it's justifiable, but somewhat more of one. But it almost just seems so that her brother and dad and people will feel things, but we should already feel things. Young blood is dead. And I mean, I don't mean like they were America's heroes. Like, they're celebrities. Like, when celebrities die or when soldiers die, we go nuts over it. Everybody should have already been sad enough. And then in addition to the hundreds of millions of casualties, and also the casual racism in this is weird, where they're like, the Chinese peasants think they're gods.
What was that about?
What are you talking about?
Oh my God, that was so weird.
Why is this here? What the fuck's going on here? It just... I don't know much about Chinese mythology, but that sounds like, they'll just lay down and die because they think, it sounds like a bunch of hooey. More like that'd be what some weird-ass New Age cult like the fucking Heaven's Gate people here in America did. You know what I mean? We don't have to blame this on, like, Chinese peasants. Just say some nut-ass people in North Dakota did. You know what I mean? Like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Anyhow, that's an aside. But, so we have some bad misogyny and some casual racism in the comic, and I kind of put them together. But the misogyny is definitely the worst. It's not a good couple pages, and it's very triggering for people. And it's hard for me to recommend that anybody read this because of it, just because that part's very triggering.
All right. Darry, you'd said that this does set up some continuity afterwards, though, right?
Yeah, so years later, the Savage Dragon continuity is reset when a villain called Dark Lord shows up, and does a bunch of shenanigans and whatever. And the big reveal in that story is that Dark Lord is the child of Liberty and the Martians, and it grows up to be basically the dark side of the Savage Dragon universe, if I'm remembering this correctly. But I don't know if this was planned. I don't know if Larson said, well, I have a big milestone issue coming up and I need the villain to have a big deal. I don't know any of the details, but I know that reading this, I was like, oh, wait, this is followed up somewhere in the future. This hybrid has become a big deal.
How many years are we talking after this?
Oh, goodness. This was 97? I would say within a decade, maybe. Yeah, because I don't remember if it was, say,
talking about slow burn.
Well, that's the thing with the Savage Dragon books. You know, Larson's the only person involved, so he can really take his time to focus on stuff. You know, currently in the book, it's not Officer Dragon, it's his son Malcolm, who's aged in real time and become a superhero in his own right. It's also like a weird sex comic
like Earth
now
2 or something.
Yeah, there's a lot of continuity for a book that is only written and drawn by one guy. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there because I did remember from reading the Monthly Dragon book that Liberty's kid does eventually return and destroy the universe.
I mean, that's the thing, and that doesn't make it better per se. But
no, not at all. I'm
not saying you're justifying it or anything, but at least there is some kind of like point to it in a long run, because like as it is when you're reading it, there's no point. It's gratuitous. That's the other thing I want to get clear. If you're not reading this, like there's a point where you see her shackled, her legs are all fucking spread. You keep seeing like her face get, like her eyes get bigger and bigger as she's more and more horrified, as I assume like she's being penetrated or whatever, and it's just terrible. Like there's just the other thing. I don't think it should have happened at all. But if you were going to do it, you certainly didn't have to fucking do it like this.
No.
You could have made it a machine. I don't know. I still wouldn't have liked it. Like you said, artificial insemination or some kind of thing. I still wouldn't have liked it, but at least it would have been somewhat more palatable. I don't see how anybody who's been like sexually abused or harassed or assaulted or raped, you know, how you would read this and not be triggered a little bit.
Right. If I was involved in this right here, I feel like at some point I would probably be upset by the way it was handled and want to find a way to make sure that it meant something. You know, at the end of the story,
she's basically lost all of her agency and is catatonic.
Right. It's horrible. It's a horrible way to leave.
I don't know
person.
what happens next to her, but like it's not a good place to leave this. You know,
right? It needs to matter, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And I think that you know, I could see Larson looking at it and saying, okay, this needed to matter at some point. So,
well, that's the problem there is I think a lot of people, in particular men, think that rape is just another thing that you do. Mark Miller said as much, that it's just another evil thing, and this is a way to have a payoff. This is a way to have a big, an apex of a story. You know, it can be a big moment for character development for everyone, but it's not. It's not the same as other evil things. This is like the exception to like the rule. Like you can come up with a way you're like, well, you shouldn't murder people, but I get why that guy murdered that guy, you know, or like, well, you shouldn't hit somebody, but that's why they, you know, hit him. You know, you can justify almost every crime possible, every transgression. That's not one of them. Can you imagine being like, listen, I don't think you should rape me, but I get why no, you can't fucking say it. It doesn't work that way. It's not the same as other things. It's not. And you can't just drop it into a story so that it feels more mature, so it feels like a big moment to show how evil the Martians are or whatever. Like I just don't think it's necessary. If you're going to do it, it should matter and it should pay off. I'm not saying you can never have rape in a story, but goddamn, why is there a rape in this story that's a fucking crossover between trading cards and superheroes?
No shit. Okay,
like what are we fucking talking about here? It doesn't even have a for mature readers thing slapped on it or anything. You're not even like this is a general audience. It's $2, man. What the fuck are you trying to fucking fool? You're not even. There's no point. There's nothing artistic to it. Honestly, it just seems it seems weird. Like you said, they felt like this was a big moment, but it's gratuitous to me. And honestly, like I said, I can't really recommend this for these. You take these pages out, and even, you know, if they mentioned it off panel and the same thing had happened, I would like it. I could still in good heart good naturally recommended. As it is, I'm like, well, read it, but don't look at those 2 pages if you've ever had any of these kind of problems, because it'll haunt you a little bit.
Well, Darry, I want you to tell me what you thought of our conclusion here. Savage Dragon made his way to Mars.
I thought this was such a great action movie way of ending things. This whole thing has a real summer blockbuster feel to it, and ironically enough, almost none of it reminds me of the actual Tim Burton film.
Not even a little.
No.
Yeah, honestly, other than the visuals, there's very little overlap there. In issue 3, before we get to the Savage Dragon great moment, they actually have Super Patriot giving like the big, powerful speech of all the characters, all the cameos, everyone getting together. I even see Mr. Majestic and
okay, Mr. Majestic. Why was he up there with Mighty Man fucking everything up? This is a Superman guy. What's he waiting for?
This can't possibly be the case. But did anyone else notice that they seem to have drawn in Prototype?
I didn't see that.
If you look at the there's panels on in issue 3. I think it might just be Heatwave. I think they might have similar costumes. But when I was
they could look similar in like a very small, because Prototype's got that helmet that kind of has the the, I don't know how to say it, like the face part of it's not his face, but it's like dark. And Heatwave has that stuff around him that kind of the place where he would have the dark part of his helmet is Heatwave's face.
Yeah.
Maybe that's it. I saw Wildstar there though, and that was pretty cool. I like Wildstar.
Yeah, Wildstar. There's a panel where it's Wildstar and Star together fighting something else.
Hey, yeah.
It's the Star Brothers.
Finally. Anyway. David and Christy, the Brinkleys United.
I thought that was great. I'm a sucker for that type of stuff. I still watch it. I still watch Independence Day, the movie, once a year, and I love this. I love the idea of Super Patriot, who's the Eric Larson version of Captain America, getting up there and saying, "Listen, we all know why we're here. There's no question about that. You know what you have to do. Get to it because it's worth doing." And then it's just you can hear the music swell as all these relatively new superheroes save the world. And then I love that you get to the 4th issue and it's just, what has the dragon, ostensibly the main hero in this whole crossover, done? He has gone to their homeworld because he has a friend who can teleport, and he has just wrecked everything. And I
love that part.
What a great image way of putting the bow on it. If DC's invasion had ended with them sending the Suicide Squad to Thanagar and just being like, mess everything up, make sure they can never ever do this again, but of course they didn't do this. And Image is like, oh no, we're going to make sure they can't even think about coming back here again, so we're going to send our indestructible amnesiac superhero back there to just wreck everything behind enemy lines. And it's great too because it's a full page. He's wearing some like MacGuffin suit so they don't have to explain why he can breathe on Mars and everything else. And he's cracking a joke. Like you can almost hear like John McClane or someone saying it. It's just one of those things where it's like, I wish that stuff with Liberty weren't in here, but everything else, I'm totally about it.
And I like that moment too. And like I said, I love Vanguard. Yeah. He's like, oh, I can't help you directly. And if you read his book, he talks about like why he's not supposed to, but he can like teleport people around and like indirectly do stuff. And he's like, oh yeah, I'll fly you to Mars. Sure, what the fuck ever. But like I always wonder, I'm like, if Savage Dragon could just go destroy all of Mars, why didn't he just destroy all of this on Earth faster?
Right. I thought the same thing. I was like, he's obviously powerful enough to go to the home world.
Right. And just destroy everything they have. Where they
still
a little
OP, bro. Just a little OP there. I mean, a little overpowered.
I'm not mad about it. I think it's great too, because like you're like Darry saying, it gives it that cool ending, and who gives a shit if it makes sense or not? Because like you just want to end it with that cool like middle finger into a thumbs up, like action movie style from the time. But I did think that when I saw like, oh, that's cool. He fucked them all up in Mars. Why didn't he just fuck them up on Earth to begin with?
Well, yeah, but the way you got to think about it is Earth is the front line. So it's the equivalent of saying, am I strong enough to go to the front lines of a battlefield and destroy all the equipment and the soldiers that I encounter? Well, no, probably not. But if you send me to the Pentagon, I could probably, do some damage. That's how I was looking at it, because the original premise in issue 1 is, well, why are the Martians attacking Earth now? Well, it's because they don't have a space fleet, right? They don't really, maybe they don't know about Vanguard. They don't know how powerful these guys are. Certainly there's nothing preventing Mighty Man, Mr. Majestic, and Supreme from pushing Mars into the sun. So the telemetry is not that great. But I kind of read it as like you're sending someone behind enemy lines and hoping for the best. And Dragon's the best person to do that because as much as you hurt him, he can always regrow. So
yeah, no, I got it. No, I'm not. It was more just. Here's the thing. It sounds like he destroyed all of Mars, but what he probably only destroyed was their command center.
Right.
Yeah, right. I see him like,
but like the way they're talking, because they're like, "Come in, Mars, Mars," and so it's just like, why do that? Also, I'll give him this too. Early on, they have force fields here, and and so he couldn't do it here, because there are too many force fields there. They probably had fewer of them once he got behind him. But kudos to Vanguard. What a guy. I hope he got some gas money from Savage Dragon.
Yeah, they're also like, they're underground, right? Like the whole Martian civilization is underground.
Yeah.
They're clearly experimenting with complicated reproduction. Like, you don't know. There might only be.
Jesus Christ.
I'm just saying, they might not, they might be at a point in their evolutionary development where they don't have a very big population, and maybe this giant Chicago man with a fin shows up, and at first they're like, "Hey, are you our deposed emperor?" "Oh, you're not? Okay, cool." And then he's like, "I'm gonna murder everyone because you guys wrecked the loop."
I ought to tweet Rob Liefeld and ask him about Youngblood in this issue and be like, "Hey, what do you think of Mars Attacks and how they treated Youngblood, Rob?"
He will fucking block you. He'll think that you're being an asshole.
Yeah. That's why I'll never do it. I don't want to be blocked.
But like, I too would like to know what he thought about this, because it's utterly unnecessary. Like Darry said, you can just go on. You don't have to put this in here. At the same time, as weird as this is going to sound, I don't think Eric Larson, I don't think these guys meant anything bad by it. It was just like, I don't even think it was like a ha fuck you. It was more like, hey, they're not going to be around anymore. It's kind of like a loser, like Bret Hart's going to WCW. He should put somebody over before he leaves. Where these guys aren't going to be around, let's get these Martians over. They're not going to affect anything. We're going to kill them, and go on. I don't even know that. Like I said, I don't think we know there was any maliciousness intended there. I'm sure it was fun. Like the same way you kind of elbow your guys, like, we give each other a hard time on here. Right. But I don't think that there was like hatred involved.
It's not like they draw on all the characters being murdered in a
all heads on spikes and stuff.
I mean, it almost makes sense in the context, as I think Dean mentioned before. Youngblood is the premier super team, and
they're celebrities. Like, they're loud.
Yeah, they're well known. They're government funded. They're like the big bad guys. If you're going to attack Earth, it's like, I should probably take out them first before I do anything.
You might not even know about Shadowhawk or Cyberforce. Wildcats, part of their fucking name is covert. You know what I mean? Like, they don't. Like, the idea is that, like, they're not out there in front of God and everybody. Now, Dragon is. He's a cop, and you know what I mean. But like, he doesn't have a big headquarters. He'd go after the cop shop anyway, whether he was there or not.
Does Shadowhawk have any powers?
No, not that I know.
I didn't think so. Okay.
I think there's like different iterations of him. There may be one that has, because I think there's some Shadowhawk time.
I'll learn more out of that later, but I didn't think that each iteration like got a special power.
No. This one for sure doesn't. This one for sure is his only power is like, telling the military to, leave him alone because he's going to go save some people while they fuck around. Yeah. And there's a lot of that. There's a lot of like the Witchblade Max moment, which, that's a really fun moment. But like the Max is like, go to Times Square. Why? I don't know. It reminds me of the Dawn of the Dead scene. They're at the harbor, and the other cops are leaving. The people will be on the helicopter, and the cops in the boat are like, yeah, we're going to try and get to some islands. And they're like, what island? It's like, any island.
Just any.
And so it's like, go to Times Square. Why? Is it safe there? I don't know. It's a place to go.
They're digging in.
I love the Max in this comic because it's so obvious that no one had any idea what the Max was, and they were just like,
it's not even. He's only like semi-real, right?
Yeah,
like,
that's the other thing.
What's happening here?
Right.
If you've read the Max books, it's like, wait, does this even make sense with his comic? But
again, Keith had to okay it or he wouldn't be here.
Yeah, it's a minor quibble. I like seeing him in there because to Dean's point earlier, like, I do like seeing the various characters interact, and this had to be the only time Witchblade met Max. But again, I got figures of both of them, so I was happy to see it.
Right. Finally, your headcanon becomes real. The moment.
Well, Witchblade had to be like a rookie too, because she only premiered in '97. So good for Silvestri for being like, hey, I don't really care about Cyberforce. Could you put this broad in here like as quickly as possible? And they were like, yeah, sure.
That's not too long after this. She gets a show, right? 2000 TNT, something like that.
Yancey Butler, yes sir,
Yeah.
yes sir.
When I worked at Turner, TNT still had like a poster of Witchblade in there. They had this poster to like 2007. Being canceled for like 5 fucking years, man. Honestly, this is going to sound weird. I'm always making such weird like pop culture analogies. But in a lot of ways, this is almost like a Smiths album because it feels a lot less like an album. Their albums felt more like collections of singles. This feels a lot less like a big story and more like a bunch of little moments that they put together that somehow kind of resolve, a whole thing. It feels like the Shadowhawk Spawn moment, the Shadowhawk with the Cyberforce military moment, the Spawn save Cyberforce moment. I'm not saying there's no narrative, but it almost feels like these moments are packed in under the narrative, whether they go seamlessly or not. Listen, I think it's a perfectly enjoyable comic other than the gratuitous rape scene, which, is like, other than that, how'd you enjoy the movie, Mrs. Lincoln? Like I said, if you're aware of it and you want to try it, there's a very large content warning here, but it's like Darry's been saying, it's the only time you're going to see a lot of these guys talk to each other. It's always a lot of fun to see various superheroes get together. It's worth it for a lot of the little cameos. Like I said, I marked out just as much, to see the little Ninja Turtle or the little Ninja Turtles cameo or the Wildstar moment. Or even when they mentioned that the Pact died. I'm like, oh, wow, somebody remembers the Pact besides me. Great. It's a cool, neat little series. I don't think it ever quite comes together, and I think it has that big strike against it. But there are definitely worse ways to spend a little time, especially if you enjoy the heroes of this era, or if you just like seeing the Martians of Mars Attacks, because honestly, when they get drawn, they're drawn very well here. And I think about at least 80% of their appeal is in their aesthetic.
Right.
So pure 90s, baby. Pure 90s here. And, I don't think we talked about this, but in some ways, this is like 96. This is like the last gasp of old Image. Image is going to be a lot different in 98 in a lot of ways. This is kind of like that last time where it ever feels like there was ever an Image universe, at least consistently, So it's a neat little piece of history in that regard, too. Also, bringing it all together, the one thing I'll always appreciate more than anything is when you see a character use an accessory, and there is Spawn killing a giant ant and cockroach with a board with a nail in it, and I have nothing but respect for that. I love it when I love it when I see a character use an accessory. I loved it when I would read the G.I. Joe comics and Repeater had his M60, but Leatherneck had his M16 over under with the A2 grenade launcher, and you could see them drawn differently. I was like, oh yeah, I've got that. So I like that too. So your mileage may vary. I'm not going to read this again for the reasons I stated, but it's not it's not terrible for any reasons. A lot of fun house ads. Enjoy that.
Yeah. I just hopped onto Robotech Wiki here. No, I'm just kidding. I hopped onto DC
itself.
This is actually on DCFandom.com. I assume because of the Wildstorm tie-in. There was a previous event to this called Shattered Image. And that occurred between August of 96 and December of 96.
Yeah, I'd like to cover that sometime too.
Right. I picked up all 4 issues of that. So you were mentioning about how this was kind of going to be, the Image universe was going to be changing. And that was actually, for me, one of the last events that I remember happening for Image Comics was Shattered Image. I'm sure there might be something after that, but
I mean, the business model of Image itself is going to have to change in approximately a year because 35% of the comics they used to sell, they're not going to sell anymore.
Right.
Because Wildstorm's going to be a part of DC. And if that doesn't make you change your fucking business and change what you do, then you're just not going to have a business to change.
Well, so back to the story for myself. I mean, I read it. I think a lot of the issues that I had with it was more along the lines of I don't know if I felt that the characters were being treated or represented well well enough. And the thing is that I used to read a lot of Image and Darry, while you were away, I think I was telling Dean, the comics that I was reading at the time, I was reading Savage Dragon pretty religiously, Stormwatch, Wildcats, and Supreme. So those were about the 4 main titles that I was getting. You know, when Deadly Duo showed up, I recognized who they were, but I don't remember them being idiots like this. I think they were played as comedic in the books that they were. Labman had no idea who that was. Didn't know any of the Super Patriots kids. I didn't know any of that. Those characters showing up here brand new, fine, that's fine. I don't know who they are, but you know, the rest of the ones that I'm very familiar with. And Shadowhawk going around and trying to pal around I always felt like Shadowhawk was a loner to me.
I gotta say, I don't know which Shadowhawk this is, because the first Shadowhawk is probably dead. I think he's dead by this point, and I don't know much of the characterizations of the Shadowhawks that follow. So if it was like the new Shadowhawk from the Kurt Busiek book and stuff, this could be more in line with his characterization. But I agree with you. The Shadowhawk I'm more familiar with, not really what's up, to the point where, like you said, you know, you're like the Savage Dragon. He's asking Dragon for a handshake. And then I showed you, you know, Shadowhawk Volume 1, Number 4, where Savage Dragon's beating the shit out of Shadowhawk. And I'm like, yeah,
right.
The Dragon sure shakes hands weird. And let me say this about the what is it, the Deadly Duo?
The Deadly Duo.
That's another part of the rape scene that really hurts, is the next page, they're joking about a genocide.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like, so we've just seen this terrible thing happen, and now you're making jokes about how you killed all of Detroit. And like, I'm like, and so it's bad in 2 ways. Number one, under normal circumstances, I could probably let the joke slide, but you just showed me rape, so now you're making a genocide joke. Congratulations. Number 2, oh, so you're joking 3 panels after this horrific rape. Thank you.
They made a joke about the rape.
Oh, shit, that's right.
Yeah, Labman goes, gag, you don't suppose they, and then Kid Avenger goes, it's not what I would have done with a lab rat.
That's right. That's right. That's just, you don't have to do this.
Yeah.
I think that's even bad for the time, you know?
Darry, we're shitting all over this.
Listen, I'm with you guys. I enjoyed it very much. But yeah, that scene at the end, it's tacked on. It doesn't add anything to the overarching story. You could skip those pages and not really, unfortunately, know anything had happened. And yeah, as a result of that, it's really difficult for me to recommend it. But, you know, it sucks because this is one of the few times you're going to see all these characters meet, even if it's for only a couple of brief cameos. But yeah, that ending, that's rough for everyone involved.
I could see the appeal, Darry, for sure. You know, just like you said, back in the day, you see all the characters on this cover. These guys are coming together. They're going to be facing one big threat. And finally, our Image universe might be an actual Image universe. But then you find out, as you just said, and that was a well thought out, well explained, like it didn't exist. It never did.
Yeah, no, that's really spot on. You know, I mean, you're right. There's no such thing as the Image universe. There just is there are these characters and they've apparently interacted, and what's canon and what isn't is up to the individual creators. And that works the same way with like reprint rights, from what I understand. Like Todd can reprint Spawn, whatever. Doesn't matter who's in it. Like that was part of the deals. They were like, if Stormwatch was in Spawn, he could reprint it. I don't know that they ever were. But like those are the kind of deals they kept, which also falls in line with it's really not necessarily 6 universes, but it's 6 character houses that sometimes visit each other.
There's 2 comics of Wildcats on the DC Infinite app that actually feature, I think, Cyberforce characters. And it's for the rules you're saying. It's like they crossed over with the Wildcats, and it was with the assumption that, like, hey, if I ever reprint these, I'm not calling Mark Silvestri up to get his permission. Like, they appeared in my book. I have permission in the Wildcats.
Right. And it wouldn't surprise you if some money goes to Silvestri for it, but that's all been sorted out.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Ago, you know, just to make it easier. And it's one of the smart things they did, and one of the smarter things they did, considering there are 7 of them. And I don't think you would ever start a company with 7 fucking bosses. Like, you know, if you know, like they did. But, you know, kudos to them for getting that part right.
Mighty Man is not a character with a ton of appearances, but they are great. They're just a great take on the Captain Marvel premise. You see a little bit of the character here. You see some of the more interesting things about them, whereas, you know, the original Captain Marvel Shazam was a young boy Billy. Here, and it's more complicated if you read the Savage Dragon book, but Mighty Man, the Shazam stand-in, is actually a young female nurse, and there's a really cool storyline for that. And if no one's read that before and you're thinking about it, I won't spoil it, but it is great. It's a great Captain Marvel story. And seeing that character here and really be in their element and really kind of save the world is incredibly rewarding.
And Mighty Man's a character that's in the Big Bang stuff too. That's really good. That Gary Carlson, who scripted this, writes, Big Bang, and didn't create Mighty Man, but was a co-creator of a lot of the Big Bang characters. And when you see Mighty Man show up in the Big Bang comics, it's a treat as well.
I think we've reached the end of our discussion here. Anything left unsaid though before we get into plugs?
No, it's all been spoken. Nothing was left unspoken.
Oh,
unspoken issues have been spoken. I like it. All right. Well, that, my friends, was Mars Attacks Image. And we went for way longer than I thought we'd ever go for this 4-issue series. Listen, if you want more of this, there's plenty more of this here on the Source Material Comics feed. But we're going to go ahead and get into plugs. Dean Compton, tell them about the Unspoken Decade, sir.
Yeah, go read us over at the UnspokenDecade.com, all 90s, all the time. We're on Facebook, been posting a lot of cool stuff there. Simbi Fan does a lot of the posting there. Over at Twitter, I'm about to start looking at the 1991 Marvel card set. I did 94 and 90, but I think we'll do 91 card by card because it is my absolute favorite Marvel card set of all time, and it is the bridge that I crossed to get into comic books. So check that out. That's at Unspoken Decade on Twitter. I'm gonna make Darry Wait come and like every one of them, put a heart on every single one. So how about that? So you want to come by? I need you to come look and make sure there is at least one heart on all of them. So
very nice.
Yeah, for myself, hey, listen, like I said, more Unspoken Issues right here on the Source Material Comics feed. Also, the Source Material Comics podcast. Go check out myself and Mark Radulich talking World War III. The last takes place in week 50 of DC's 52. The Martian Manhunter story, and we weren't the kindest to it. We'll just put it that way, and it's a real quick podcast. Trust me, we're not getting into everything that's happening. It was probably maybe 30 minutes long. I think that's about it. I don't really have much else I want to plug here. I don't have my calendar in front of me, but certain that you can go back in the archive and listen to us discussing 18 chapters of Valiant's Unity. It's out there, folks. And
your time will be absolute.
It will be. Well, that being said, that's Dean Compton. That's Darry Wait. I'm Jesse Starcher. We'll be talking to you soon. Have a good one. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us. Unspoken Issues is part of the UnspokenDecade.com, the home for 90s comics, blogs, and podcasts. Unspoken Issues also has a Facebook group you can join if you are interested. Just search the Unspoken Issues podcast and request to join. All of this would not be possible without W2Mnet.com and the Radulich and Broadcasting Network, so make sure to seek them out for more podcasts. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please feel free to share, and we look forward to entertaining you again soon.